rise of prolific graffiti is symbolic of our city's historical neglect of our walls and our people.
Well, Mayor Bruce Harrell has been pushing for new investments in graffiti abatement ever since he took office. Now he's pushing for some new additions to the City Council's supplemental budget process connected to graffiti, which comes to a vote in less than a week's time here. How will the council take in that budget ad and others at a time when the city has a challenging financial outlook to consider? Plus, what does a court decision about the way Seattle conducts sweeps of unauthorized encampments mean for the city's response to homelessness? And what does a new report have to share about organized crime impacting Seattle's retail stores? Well, we are tackling all that and more this week on Seattle News, Views, and Brews, your coffee break political podcast. I'm Brian Callanan. I'm a host on Seattle Channel. The views expressed here are mine, all mine. And I'm joined once again with co-host David Croman, transportation reporter for the Seattle Times. And David, it's that time of year again. I saw this tweet from you. You start posting the bar graphs about how people are trying to get rid of more zucchini than they know how to deal with in their gardens. Are we earlier than usual with this year's uptick, or what are the stats telling you?
Yeah, it does seem like we're a little earlier than usual. It's just funny because people plant zucchinis and they get excited about them, and then they explode, and people have way too many zucchini. And it's a great economics lesson in supply and demand. What happens when everyone's suddenly flushed with zucchini?
You can suddenly have too many. That is true. I'm a big fan of grilling them. That has been on the menu for about the past 3 weeks. So that's how we're dealing with it in the Callanan home. So thank you, David, as always, for joining me. Thanks also to our background noise sponsor, City Grind Espresso, on the first floor of City Hall. Thanks also to our show patrons. Happy to welcome in Claire as our newest patron. She just joined at the $5 a month level. Thanks a lot, Claire. I sent her this snazzy Seattle News, Views, and Brews decal. How awesome is that? So if you listen, please be like Claire, support the show. We will also feature a photo of your sticker in action on our show in the Sticker Shots feature. So make sure you send them into Seattle News, Views, and Brews at gmail.com. You will see that photo on Converge Media because Converge airs the video version of this podcast Wednesday nights at 7. All right, off we go with Right Here, Right Now. Well, David, it's supplemental budget time for the City Council, which I wanted to put in perspective for folks. This is the time we see minor tweaks based on some programs that might need a slight boost. The SPD is asking for less than $1 million for some additional OT costs, for example, for overtime. The city's also looking for an additional $19 million for some lawsuits and claims, many of them connected to alleged police misconduct. But this is a multi-billion-dollar budget, so these aren't big pieces we're talking about here. However, there is a bit of a power play going on between the mayor and the council over his graffiti team. This was reported in Publicola. The council said no to Harrell's plan to spend more on graffiti removal last year, a $4 million price tag on that. But Harrell somehow found some unspent funds in Seattle Public Utilities, made his graffiti plan happen anyhow. So now contracts have been signed for that, and that really leaves the council basically forced into funding this expansion of graffiti cleanup. Is that how you read this, David?
Yeah, I mean, it seems like this is sort of always where there's the most tension kind of between mayors and city councils, because technically city councils hold the budget strings, but the mayor has a lot of authority over how certain dollars are spent, and when certain things don't get funded, then voila, there's a bit of magic trick, and they find those dollars somewhere, and signing contracts is sort of a good way to back the city council in funding his priorities. It seemed like we maybe saw more of these kind of scuffles with Jenny Durkin and the council. The complaints from the council was sort of the opposite, though, that they would fund something, but then the money wouldn't get spent. But yeah, I mean, this is kind of an interesting move. Bruce Harrell and Ann Davison both talked a lot about graffiti removal on the campaign trail, so it's a big priority for them, and getting a little trickery as a result.
Yeah, and I guess I should point out, you make that point about Mayor Durkin. This is not the first time a mayor has backed a council into a corner over a budget request, and this is not a major expenditure either. But I will say the bigger issue for me, David, is what happens with the rest of the mayor's downtown activation plan. And I'm interested to see this because it appears he's aiming for more dollars to come out of the Jumpstart Big Business payroll tax. Council President Juarez was just talking to me about this a few days ago, earlier this week. This is where things get really prickly as to where the mayor wants to push that revenue versus where the council has directed it to go. Affordable housing, Green New Deal priorities among the top priorities there. So I was just looking at this, David, and this definitely came up last year with the council and the mayor. this early battle over Jumpstart, is this a precursor of sorts to the bigger budget process we're going to get into this fall? Because I'm looking at a not completely rosy economic outlook ahead. And with Jumpstart bringing in more revenue than anticipated, it just seems like that fund almost has a target on it to me. What do you think?
For sure. Yeah. I mean, and this always seems to always happen when there's a revenue source that in theory is kind of dedicated for a specific thing. This has its roots back to 2017 or whatever, when the city council first tried to pass a head tax, and they got a bunch of flack for not defining what they were going to spend it well enough on. So with this Jumpstart tax, they went to great pains to do that, to define some of the programs they wanted to fund with it. Mm-hmm. Now, the difference between then and now is back then, the city was doing pretty well with its coffers. A lot of real estate excise tax coming in and commercial parking tax. There's a lot of funding coming in the doors. That is not the case right now. And so suddenly all those demands to have a really specific purpose for the Jumpstart tax seem to be kind of going out the door, where it's seen instead as a rare kind of lucrative source of funding. And so, of course, there's going to be a lot of competition for that money.
Yeah, it makes me think, too, of the sweetened beverage tax from a few years ago, too. These new revenue streams come in, and maybe they do a little bit better than anticipated. And then, I think it turns into something where, and this is interesting to me, for as much as the business community and Mayor Harrell pushed back on this Jumpstart tax, now more than happy to jump in and start using those dollars. That's another piece of this, too.
Yeah, and that's pretty typical, too. A parallel, I think, could be maybe like the Climate Commitment Act money in the state. The Republicans hated that, and they did everything they could to kill it. Didn't succeed. Now that's bringing in a lot more money than was expected, and so now they're happy to fight over how and where you're going to spend that money. And, I think you can find those fights at every level. Republicans at the federal level celebrating money from the Inflation Reduction Act they voted against. So it's two different stories when you're talking about passing a tax versus when there's actually money sitting on the table. Suddenly, people tend to like it a little bit more. Yeah. And so that's where we are, I think, with the Jumpstart tax. And it's just consistently, since it was passed, been kind of the backbone in some ways to the city's general fund budget, and how they have avoided some of the kind of major cuts that might have come along if it had not existed.
Right, especially out of COVID. Thanks for that, David. I wanted to move on to another struggle, if you will, for the city ahead over the way it conducts sweeps of unauthorized encampments. So a King County judge has recently ruled on this, saying the city of Seattle has used too broad of a definition of when a camp is an obstruction that would allow for a sweep. This stems from a 2019 court case where the ACLU was claiming sweeps were happening with little to no warning, and much of the property of the claimants was destroyed rather than stored. So the city will appeal this decision. But David, I thought this was an interesting case because this could potentially have some major impacts on the way the city approaches these encampment cleanups. What do you think?
Yeah, I don't entirely understand the immediate implications right now. I think the judge, as far as I understand, acknowledged that sweeps are going to continue, and that the city did have a right to remove sort of genuine obstructions, but it's sort of around the definition of an obstruction that's the problem. So I don't entirely understand if by ruling that definition unconstitutional, that means the city has to stop all sweeps based on obstructions. Yeah. But my sense is the mayor's office doesn't have any plan to do that they're going to continue moving ahead with this. So they have a lot of legal minds on their staff. So I don't know if they feel confident that the ruling doesn't ban all sweeps, or if they're just going to kind of test the waters and make the judge crack down. I don't know. My take on it, I think there's going to be an appeal filed on this and take this case through the courts, and we'll have to see. I know the ACLU is really pushing for that injunction where they could say, all right, well, while this is under discussion, we need to stop these sweeps from happening. That would be a much bigger legal hurdle here. But I wanted to move to another piece of this, because the city's talking about appealing, et cetera, but this whole idea of protecting an unhoused person's belongings.
How do you even do that? Because that's a part of this case, too. I've been to sweeps before. I know you've seen them, too. Determining what should be thrown away, what turns into something that needs to be stored. That becomes a mess really quickly here. This idea of protecting property in the case of removing unauthorized encampments. I just think it's a really difficult issue to tackle.
It is, yeah, and it has been a difficult issue to tackle for years. I think my colleagues, well, now colleagues, they were my colleagues at the time, a few years ago, did a big story about the city not doing a great job of tracking those belongings. And it's tough because, if you've been in those encampments, there does tend to be a lot of trash and things around that I don't think could be qualified as belongings, in part because, there isn't like a trash service to these encampments necessarily. But, within those are pretty significant things for the people that live there, including, IDs and stuff that's difficult for them to replace. And then if they don't have, it's difficult for them to get services and things like that. So it's, I think this has been an issue that has plagued the city for a while. There's also sort of there was a court ruling, and I don't actually totally understand exactly how the implications of this or how they played out, but court ruling around basically ruling that a tent qualified as a home. And therefore putting some restrictions on searches and seizures of those of things in there. And that adds another wrinkle there that, again, I don't know how that actually is playing out on the ground.
It's part of what the ACLU is saying. They're saying this isn't homeless people we're talking about. We're talking about unhoused people because they very much consider their tents, their RVs, their home. I think that's a really interesting twist on this. And I think this turns into another long-standing legal battle for the city and the ACLU. Again, this case dating back to 2019, certainly held up by the pandemic, but we're going to see a lot more with it in the months and years upcoming. So I'm going to put a pin on that one for a minute because I wanted to move on to our next story here, folks. The battle against street racing in Seattle taking a turn this week. Find out how the city council is responding to this fast-moving problem coming up on Now Hear This. Following up on a story we covered last month, the City Council this week will be voting on a measure to expand the use of traffic cameras to catch speeders. And it's also designated a list of areas where racing will be restricted. Half of the 6 locations designated are West Seattle, where some neighbors close to Alki Beach say help is needed urgently.
In the middle, it's Alki Speedway, and God be with you if you want to be on the street or do anything.
And folks, this comes on the heels of a horrific crash on Alki Avenue July 16th, where a speeding driver hit another car, pushed it off the road and into the waters of Elliott Bay. 24-year-old Madison Kelly was pulled out of the water by some bystanders in critical condition and, as of last report, is still recovering in the hospital. But David, following up on this, the place is designated as racing restricted areas in this legislation. I thought this was interesting. All in either Councilmember Herbold's district or Councilmember Peterson's district, and both of them were, wait for it, the ordinance co-sponsors. I bring that up because there are a lot more places in Seattle, clearly, where people are speeding. This legislation appears to be more about kind of starting the conversation about preventing street racing, actually implementing it, putting in these cameras and paying for that. That's going to have to be planned out by the mayor's office, right?
Yeah, we're still a ways from these cameras actually being rolled out, and there's probably going to need to be more money budgeted for that to happen too. If I'm not mistaken, wasn't an additional location added on MLK and Rainier Valley?
I believe they're talking about that too. Yeah, this is the time when council members are kind of throwing in their own amendments to add in these other pieces as well.
Yeah, right. And, I thought Councilmember Morales had some interesting comments last week about this, her request for cameras in Rainier Valley, but she was less talking about kind of street racing and more sort of the larger safety climate. And we know that Seattle Police Department is basically not doing traffic enforcement anymore. Washington State Patrol is still really understaffed and writing many fewer tickets than they were before the pandemic. And so, these automated enforcement has really taken on a bigger place in just sort of general traffic enforcement. There's the kind of added benefit of it has not unanimous by any stretch, but more support from certain organizations who are concerned about bias in policing because, there's no person with a gun involved in that interaction. You're just mailed a ticket. But, then of course you're sort of, I think there are some surveillance privacy advocates who get concerned about sort of backpedaling our way into a surveillance state. And so there are a lot of restrictions on when and how these can be used that are interesting. So yeah, I mean, it's kind of one piece of a broader conversation that's going on around automated enforcement that, it's going to be interesting. I think there's going to be a lot of temptation to continue to expand this pretty broadly. Just as I said, the combination of a lot of people dying on the roads with just not that many police officers doing traffic enforcement anymore.
Yeah, less expensive than paying for cops for sure. But we've touched on this issue before too, David, when it comes to transportation equity. And I feel like this is part of that too, because how do you balance this idea of, okay, my neighborhood is now better protected by street cameras. You got that on one side. Then you have the idea of, hey, wait, the city is picking on my neighborhood by adding too many speed cameras. That equity idea and that balance comes into my mind too. What are your thoughts about that?
Yeah, for sure. And I think that's a big concern. It's also why, we see pretty strong restrictions on exactly how these can be used.
The city has that surveillance committee that oversees this. Keep going.
And at the state level too, there are pretty strong restrictions. We saw some frustration around that actually there was a traffic camera on the lower West Seattle Bridge during the closure that was there exclusively to catch people who were driving over that bridge who shouldn't have been. But then there was a hit and run right by there. And, there were a lot of questions around, why can't we use that traffic camera to find who the person was who did that hit and run? And the answer was because that's not why it was there. And so it sort of butted up against some of these strict rules around these cameras. And, I think we would see more of that. You put these cameras in to do one specific thing, but then, it sort of, by definition, requires you to shut them off or not use them at all when something else, perhaps equally serious, comes up. But that wasn't why it was passed in the first place. So, I think equity concerns and surveillance concerns sort of combine with general uneasiness around how unsafe our roads are these days.
Yeah. And do you have a feel at all, David, in terms of how these actually work, meaning the pragmatic nature of it? When you put these cameras in place, is speeding reduced? I know we're a little bit early in terms of the city of Seattle implementing these, but what's your experience been with that part of it? Is this a technique that actually works to reduce speed and help people out in terms of road safety?
Yeah, I think the jury's out a little bit on that, and I'm sure there are studies that I haven't read, but. There's some early signs that as far as, blocking the box goes or transit lanes, there are some early signs that there are really not that many repeat offenders, which is a good indication that maybe people are learning their lesson pretty quickly. I think intuitively it feels like you would, you get a pretty nasty ticket in the mail. Right. You think twice before doing it. That said, if you look at the number of tickets that, again, back to the lower West Seattle Bridge, which was enforced by cameras, there are thousands and thousands of unpaid tickets associated with that, including from people who drove across it hundreds of times with impunity. And so, some questions around how you follow up on those. So that might be sort of the counter example of maybe they don't work. I don't know. But
Interesting. No, thank you for bringing up all those different pieces. The enforcement piece is, of course, a huge part of that. And how does that actually translate into money for the city's coffers and then actually increased public safety on our roads? So thank you for that. But I wanted to talk about another public safety story with you this week, David. The Public Safety Committee in the City Council is hearing a report from the city auditor that says the city can do more to prevent organized retail crime. Okay, so you might have seen this yourself, folks. You're in a store. Somebody runs out the door stealing a cart full of stuff, and let's say security isn't able to catch that person. Where does all that stuff go? Some of it goes to illegal sales on the street. I've seen it on 3rd Avenue, 12th and Jackson, in my work out in the field, but some of it ends up going to illicit online sellers too. Nationally, the numbers are saying in this report, organized retail crime has risen by 60% since 2015. Seattle is one of the top 10 cities in the country affected by it. David, I was just a little gobsmacked by this one. Did it surprise you to see this report, just how sophisticated thieves are getting with retail crime and fencing them here and boosting them here? What did you make of this?
Yeah, it's I don't know. I guess I didn't really have expectations, so I don't know if I can be surprised or not. We certainly hear it from particularly downtown businesses around Third Avenue that it's a real problem, and I don't think they were lying. And that seems to be the case. What we do about that is a tough question because, and it kind of goes to a lot of conversations we're having, which is, there are vulnerable people involved in this chain of crime, really. I mean, and some of it is not that helpful, or the city's not that interested in prosecuting, but some of it is also led by people who are not necessarily vulnerable, who are just kind of in it for profits and things like that. It kind of reminds me of drug use, debate over drug use, going after dealers versus users, and what you're trying to accomplish and how. And I think the retail crime, of course, is caught up in all that. Is somebody stealing because they need a loaf of bread and they need out of survival, or are they stealing because they have a larger business plan that is tied up in retail theft? I don't know. It's interesting to see these analyses come out.
Yeah, no, I was interested to see it too, just how big this whole problem was. And there was another twist that I found interesting here. There was a report from the city auditor that showed that retailers can report theft to the SPD by calling 911 or through SPD's retail theft program. You can file misdemeanor theft cases online without an officer on hand. But many retailers are actually not doing that. So you got SPD saying in the first quarter of this year, they received zero theft reports from some of the large downtown retailers. And that can't be right, because those thefts are happening. But those businesses have actually increased the use of security guards. Okay, but then you have some retailers who can't afford the extra security, who don't want to increase their risk of lawsuits for bringing security in. And I just think, David, a big part of dealing with crime is reporting it. But when that's not going on and you have these private security forces involved here, how does that change the equation here?
It's interesting. You can understand maybe not reporting if you don't feel like anything's going to come of it. It's not really worth your time and energy. A lot of these, I'm surprised it's zero, because, I had my bike stolen once and I filed a report, not because I was interested in police investigating it, but because I had to for insurance. Purposes. If I wanted my renter's insurance to reimburse me, I had to file a police report. And so I'm surprised it's zero. But, I think there's just a sense that, and even if there were police to respond, what do they do? The theft has already happened. So that's interesting. The security side is also, that poses a lot of really interesting kind of questions, because a lot of these security guys, I don't know about a lot of them, but some number of them are actually Seattle police officers.
That's right.
Picking up secondary work, which is interesting, because then you get in this, technically as a sworn police officer, they're never supposed to be just serving a business. Even in their secondary role, they're still supposed to be serving the public. But if you look at, there's you can find a number of OPA complaints where police officers are seen to be in their secondary duty, seen to be doing the business of Ross or Target or whatever. Rather than the public, which is what they were sworn to do. And so that creates a lot of sort of tension around where loyalties lie. Private security officers who are not police officers also have their own sticky situations, because they didn't go through the training and they don't have the oversight that comes with public police departments. So that also presents some sticky situations.
Yeah, no, this one is a really interesting report, folks. If you really want to dive into the public safety meeting agenda, make sure you do it. It's a 43-page report, but a lot of great details coming out of this one from the city auditor. It looks like some possible help from the state AG's new organized retail crime unit, the Department of Justice as well. We'll see how the council acts on those recommendations. All right, well, up next, those staff shortages at King County Metro we've been talking about over the last couple of weeks. A sliver of good news to pass along on that front. David has the story next on Transportation Talk. David, you wrote recently in the Seattle Times about a tentative agreement between King County Metro and its main union there. It seems like it couldn't have come at a better time with all the staffing shortages we've been talking about. It sounds like the union could gain a substantial pay increase. What's going on here?
Yeah, I mean, we wouldn't normally write about every tentative agreement between government agencies and their unions because there's a lot of both of them. But this one just stood out because it's such a problem at King County Metro. I mean, a lot of a lot of transit agencies, I mean, really government agencies in general. But I just think people really feel the impacts of staff shortages at King County Metro on a daily basis because their buses don't show up.
Right, exactly.
That's a problem. And so in this case, it felt like kind of an relevant, interesting story to get out there because you're right. I mean, these would constitute up to 17% raises over 3 years, which in the scope of a contract is pretty good. And along with, a quote appreciation bonus to people of $2,500 and a retention bonus of another $2,500 to try and get people to stick around. All of this is in service of trying to both keep people from retiring right away and also bring on new people so that there are enough operators to run the service and enough mechanics to get the just huge number of buses that are broken down back into service.
That's what we had reported on a couple of weeks ago, right? So it's not just it's not just a situation of, hey, the supply chain is causing some troubles here with us getting the parts we need. It's also just a matter of getting the right amount of people involved.
Yeah, exactly. It offers some hope. I didn't put this in the story, actually. I had put it in an earlier story, but there's some caution, a little caution to be taken to this also. I think it was in Denver, maybe, had a pretty favorable contract that was struck with its transit agency there. And a year later had basically seen zero improvement in the staffing. So it's not a silver bullet by any stretch and not a sure thing, but you have to think it does improve the outlook, at least a bit, to bring on more people to fill these ranks.
I appreciate the story behind the story. In terms of what the union was giving up, it sounded like limiting the amount of time they could, like the time off they could bank, keep in the bank there, and then choosing their own schedules. There's a little bit of give and take here.
Yeah, which is why this, it's still a tentative agreement. Yeah. It's why it's not, I don't have a temperature
done and done. Yeah,
but it still needs to go to a vote. And the president of the union was saying he actually was hearing more concern about those things than he was expecting. I think just because it's, people really value flexibility and being able to do what they want when they want it, and both of these things, like you said, that the ability to change shifts and bank time off are reduced, and that kind of hits people in the heart. Whether or not the wage bumps are going to
offset that.
Offset that, I don't know. We'll see. Okay. August 14th, I think, is the day they count the vote. So we'll see.
Okay, great. All right, so we got a couple weeks, and we'll make sure we follow up on that. Thank you very much for that, David. All right, it's time to finish up here. And David, there we were watching the Mariners win a series against the Blue Jays last week at home. What is it about these two crowds, the fan base here, that makes this such an intense and really fun rivalry to watch? What do you think?
Yeah, I don't know. It is. I mean, the
it
Vancouver,
felt like a playoff game, man. It was awesome.
Yeah, the Vancouver Canadian proximity, of course, adds to it. But more than that, it's just the games end up being crazy. Every game that the Blue Jays and the Mariners play, it's just these nutso games that go back and
walk
forth.
It off here.
So yeah, they're just fun games to watch. A little stressful.
Yeah, I know. I like the fun. I'm okay with the stressful. I just need a couple more wins. That's what we're looking for here. Well, David, thank you as always for joining me. Thanks to everybody listening to Seattle News, Views, and Brews, where you can always find out what's brewing in local politics. Make sure you listen on Apple, Spotify, wherever you're tuning in here. Please find Seattle News, Views, and Brews on Patreon as well. This is very important, folks. Need your help here. Show your support if you would. Thank you for watching on Converge Media, too. We'll see you next time.
Seattle News, Views, and Brews is an independent production of Callanan Media Services. Copyright 2023.